Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. It's Nikita and today we're chatting about 5 red flags that I have noticed in romance books. Now, I have always read a lot more literary fiction or fantasy, and I've never been much of a romance reader, but something changed a few months ago, especially 6 or 7 months ago, and I just started picking up a lot more romance. While I've really enjoyed a lot of those books, there's just so many red flags that I couldn't help but notice. Now, for those who are new here, maybe don't know, I am a psychotherapist. That's what I do for a living, and part of the perks about this career is that we can't unsee what we see. And by that I mean is, especially in romance books, there are things that I've come across in romance books that have just felt so questionable and so much like a red flag that it makes it really hard for me to not see that and proceed with the book, or, you know, I guess continue to be as invested in the book and as engaged in the book. Now, if you're someone who enjoys romance books, it's totally fine. You know, these red flags doesn't mean that all romance books are bad or we shouldn't read them, so please don't interpret this video to be such. But it's me really just sharing my thoughts on some of the really common tropes that are very red flaggy that I have noticed and wanted to share those with you. The first one that I have actually noticed come up a lot is getting engaged or married too quickly. And or the sense of like your whole world becoming entirely about this person that you are talking to or that you've just started seeing, whether it's the speaking of like heteronormative romances, so whether it's like the male partner exhibiting this or the female partner, but you really kind of see that for one of the characters, the whole world becomes the other person. Or you have these like really strong feelings for them, which are really leading you to getting like married or engaged too quickly. And the reason why I bring this up is because it's something that I've noticed quite many times. One of the recent books where I noticed this was It Happened Last Summer by Tessa Bailey, and I absolutely loved that book. The main character completely gave me Alexis vibes from Schitt's Creek, and I love that show. I love Alexis. And the character development in there, the story, the setting was so sweet in that book. But amongst other books as well, one of the things that I noticed in that was almost everything seems to be, for her, became about this person, this partner that she was seeing. And not that I'm saying that was what the author's intention was in that book, but this can be... But tropes like this can actually be love bombing. Now, maybe some of you are familiar with love bombing, maybe you've heard of it, but those of you who have not, love bombing is essentially like a person going above and beyond for you, like too much, too fast sort of a thing, but in an effort to manipulate you in the long term. Now, love bombing can be conscious, subconscious, intentional, unintentional, but it's a really... this like relationship where initially you feel super safe, you feel super secure, you feel very understood, like no one has understood you before, and you feel swept off your feet with all of these amazing huge gestures and random gifts, and that makes you feel really important and desired. But if someone is manipulating intentionally, the effort is to kind of like win you over, so there can be that long-term manipulation. Some of the other signs of love bombing can be giving you like needless gifts. So we can also like love bomb not just in romantic relationships, but also in friendships. Giving you needless gifts, being in a rush to lock things down. So, you know, when I read a romance book where one of the characters is very much feeling like this is it, I've known this person for 3 weeks and I absolutely love them and I can't imagine my life without them, and I am ready to say I love you, I'm ready to kind of marry them so soon. That intensity of feeling and being in a rush to lock things down can potentially be love bombing as well. if a partner is, say, always available, which can be a bit of a red flag, like some things that I noticed in books too is that everything becomes about that person. Like everything becomes about your partner. So in romance books, like we don't, or the ones that I have read, I haven't seen so much of, you know, the partner, like the woman going out and doing other things and still having like good focus on her career or her friends or her own interests and hobbies. Like everything becomes about the partner. And that partner is also always available. They're always available and they're always demanding of your attention. Some other signs can look like always wanting you alone. And I remember this one scene from Mr. Wrong Number by Lynn Painter, where the female character, she's not feeling well. And so without asking her what she wants, he just like changes the plans completely and says, well, nope, I'm taking you home and we're spending time alone, when they were initially supposed to hang out with lots of people. And there was something icky about that. There was no consent or opinion sought from her and make decision for her. And also not taking no for an answer is also another sign of love bombing. Love bombing can also show up in surrogate relationships. So a surrogate relationship is basically when you've, like, say you've recently lost someone that you really, really love and somebody new enters your life, you can unknowingly, subconsciously sort of use that new relationship as a surrogate for the last one, right? As an emotional surrogate for the last one. So to give you an example, imagine a character in a book who, say, perhaps like lost a parent or like lost a parent, and then, you know, she goes on vacation to get away and she sees this guy. And oh my gosh, this is exactly the storyline of One Italian Summer by Rebecca Seal I had read. So sure, let's use that example. Love that book, by the way, in that setting, but this is just one thing that I noticed. Her mom passes away and she still decides to travel to the Amalfi Coast, and she meets a guy and he just feels like this, like he emotionally completes her. And I wonder if there was some sort of a surrogate relationship happening there. So we take the grief and the loss and what we missed out on in that relationship, and unknowingly we take those emotional needs and we transfer them to another relationship. This can look like, you know, people in relationships who expect their partners to be like their best friend, their therapist, their, you know, their everything. So that is a sign of a surrogate relationship. That's also another place where love bombing shows up. Okay, red flag number 2. It's a huge red flag. Red flag number 2 is he's huge and she's so super duper tiny trope. Now, I am Ali Hazelwood. I'm looking at Ali Hazelwood for this. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love my Ali Hazelwoods. I actually have all of them back here. I think she has created such a great literary community for women in STEM, and being able to see women in STEM in also like a romantic space. And I love that her female leads are so complex and so strong and so dynamic, and I am such a fan of her work. So none of these red flags means I don't like those books or I don't like those authors, but it's just things that I've potentially seen that I don't like in those books. Now, Ali Hazelwood is like just known to build her men like a fridge. And in all of her books, like all of her adult books that I've read, like The Love Hypothesis, Love on the Brain, and Love Theoretically, they're all built like a fridge. All these guys are super huge. The way that she describes them, especially in Love Theoretically, it just gave me the ick. Like her descriptions of him gave me such an ick, because it's not so much that the guy is huge. She then also describes the woman as like a direct contrast of that. So this woman is super, super, super tiny and frail. Well, not even frail, but super tiny and delicate. And I think there was a scene in Love Theoretically where I think they're being intimate or they're hugging. They're being intimate or they're hugging. And Ali Hazelwood describes that his hand is so big that when he's holding her waist, his hand spans her entire rib cage. And I don't know how that is possible. And there's just something so icky, gross, and potentially pedophilic about that image that just felt so so disturbing. And I know a lot of people have expressed similar views on this trope that's there, and I know it's not just Ali Hazelwood who uses it exclusively, it's there in so many other romance books as well, but it just feels really disturbing. And not only that, but it also perpetuates these already like toxic stereotypes against like heteronormative men and women. Like men are expected to be huge and like super muscular, and women are expected to be like dainty, tiny, flower-like things. It just perpetuates existing stereotypes. I'm not a fan of that. Especially in one of her books, the female character is, you know, like looking at the male character in a crowd, and she says something along the lines of, he's like several inches taller than the rest, and she sort of made him sound like a mountain. And I'm just not a fan of that. I think that's a little gross. And it also creates this like really unhealthy power dynamic, really. At least for the reader, it can feel like a power dynamic. All right, red flag number 3, silly misunderstandings are romanticized. Now, because I'm a new romance reader, I had no idea there was such a thing as third act misunderstanding. Apparently it's really common towards the end of the book for the characters to have like one last like misunderstanding where things almost fall apart, but then they don't and they get back together. And once you start reading enough romances, you start to see this trope come up time and time again. And I have noticed this a lot. I have noticed this in like When in Rome by Sarah Adams. I've noticed this in pretty much like all the Tessa Baileys. And most recently To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. It's a Regency era romance. And sometimes these silly misunderstandings are just so stupid and so toxic. And the way that they're romanticized feels concerning to me. It's just, it doesn't have much depth, and the characters just fall into this really random misunderstanding, especially into Love and to Loathe, and To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. Oh my gosh, I was done with the characters. Like 75% of the book, I just thought there was like, it was almost insulting how stupid these misunderstandings were that were like jeopardizing their entire romantic future together. And I know a lot of people had issues with that on Goodreads. I read that particularly in like a number of comments where people just thought that they were so annoyed with how immature these characters were. And it's not a YA book, it is an adult romance book. So I expected maybe, I guess, like adult like dialogue or adult like conflicts, but I have a problem with romanticizing things that should not be romanticized, like toxicity and just like miscommunication. And that's one of the things that really kind of keeps me from reading these books or becoming so invested in them. All right, red flag number 4, there is too much focus on the spark. Now, what I mean by that is that when we have romance books where the male and female character just meet for the first time, or the two like main characters meet for the first time, they have this like instant like spark. And while that happens, and that is great, a spark doesn't always mean connection. So we have a lot of research coming out of dating, in the field of dating, and behavioral science in the field of dating. And what we're seeing is that a spark is just like intense initial chemistry. It doesn't mean connection. There's a difference between connection and compatibility, and there's a difference between spark, immediate spark, and connection. And I think about how, you know, consumers of these books and consumers of these stories can be so easily swayed when the spark is romanticized. I believe it was one of the Abby Jimenez books that I read. I believe it's Part of Your World, where the female character goes on like a date, and the guy is nice, but she doesn't feel anything, so she doesn't even give him a second shot. But then she feels this like intense chemistry and spark with someone else like right off the bat, and everything else kind of goes ignored. Everything else is questionable goes ignored. So I think about just how, again, that is so romanticized when in the real world, the spark is not necessary and doesn't always lead to great connection. So I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe perhaps my expectations are really unrealistic for romance books. I don't know if there's such a thing as like a realistic romance book that would also like appeal to the masses. But it would be nice to see something like that a little bit more. All right, and the last red flag number 5, she is broke and he is like perfect. Like, so the broke girl and the rich, successful guy trope. And this also ties in with the she's a mess and he's not trope. I really noticed this in Lynn Painter's Mr. Wrong Number and Love Wager and so many other books, but feels really reminiscent of 50 Shades of Grey, where it feels like the female character, because she's such a hot mess, and she's perhaps broke, and the man seems like in direct contrast of that. It's like reinforcing unhelpful stereotypes, but it just creates this huge power dynamic, and again like romanticizes like someone like sweeping in and, you know, like coddling this person who is a total mess and who needs to be saved and rescued. I noticed this pretty much in all of Ali Hazelwood's books, because what usually ends up happening with her books is the female character is either like still a graduate student, or, you know, is a like love theoretically she was a professor, but again like still broke, not able to make ends meet, like a total mess, and her male characters are almost always ahead in their careers, more successful, calm, collected. And while there is certain like truth to that women are paid less than men for the same job, and that can exist in real life, where you fall in love with someone who's a little bit ahead of their career than yours. Just how like prevalent this is, it like really bothers me. Another place I noticed this was in X's and O's by Amy Leah, and I wonder if it's and I noticed it in Dating Dr. Dil by Nisha Sharma, but I wonder if it's really creating this potentially harmful idea and image in the heads of young men and women reading these books, engaging in this content of what love should look like. It would be nice to see a strong-headed female character who had her life together and didn't need to be, you know, reminded to have had lunch by like her male character. Like, it'd be nice to see a female character with everything together who can show up into the partnership as an emotional equal, as a financial equal, and not have that power dynamic. Again, I think my expectations are unrealistic. I think I'm just hoping for like a very like realistic romance, which just sounds perhaps boring, and I don't know if it would sell really well, but those are some of my thoughts. Now, those are the 5 red flags. Now, some books that I have found to be a bit of an exception to these tropes and a lot of these storylines are Emily Henry's books. They're not perfect, but I find that except for People Meet on Vacation, where there was definitely that the girl's a mess and the guy's like totally cool and collected, her other books, her main characters tend to be more of emotional equals than some of the other books, especially Book Lovers. I definitely thought both the characters were more financial and emotional equals, and I really enjoyed that dynamic. Another book that I really liked was The Bodyguard by Catherine Senner, where the female is the bodyguard for the male, and I like that. I thought that was so different. They definitely showed up as financial equals, emotional equals. You know, the woman didn't need to be like saved or coddled. But yeah, these books are not perfect. They certainly have a lot of like work that they maybe need to do on their own. They have some work that they could use as well. They're not perfect, but I thought those were some good books and good exceptions to what I have found to be the rule in the romance book genre. All right, everyone, that's all for today. Just wanted to share some red flags. If you've noticed more red flags or if you have any thoughts about this, please share them with me down below. And I will see you next week with another video. Thanks for watching.